That's right, Moto fans. It's another Always Moto production. Welcome in to the emergency department, brought to you by leatmoto.com.au and technicmotorsport.com. For those of you that are new to the channel, I'm your host, David Hogan, the Australian physiotherapist who knows the injuries of our sport of supercross and motocross. This video is a bit different. We're going to take a look at the prognosis for the number 28 from Rockstar Energy Husqvarna, Christian Craig. As per his wife's updates this week, Paige Craig, on her social accounts, a fourth surgery has occurred for Christian Craig and his elbow injury, and it's occurred this week prior to round 9 of the Super Motocross Series. The surgery was to complete a replacement of the radial head of his right elbow, also known as a radial head arthroplasty. Christian has been riding without a radial head since it was removed during his third surgery partway through the outdoors last year in 2023. And if you remember correctly, he returned to racing in October at the Motocross of Nations in France. But as you might expect, or that you're going to find out here, this lack of a radial head has led to the joint to become painful and unstable. The joint structure is severely impacted, allowing it to move a lot within itself without that radial head. The musculature and the remaining ligamentous connections can only do so much without the bone structure being there to leverage from. If you think about a stool with 3 legs, when you sit on it, it's nice and stable, right? But if you chop one of them off a couple of inches and you sit on it, it's wobbly. And the longer you sit on it, the wobblier it gets. In a basic sense, that's what's happening now in Christian's elbow without that radial head. So why would you remove the radial head and not replace it straight away? There's various reasons, and we're not up on all of those things medically for Christian's scenario. But in short, it's about recovery timeframes for athletes, as they're always trying to get back on the bike as soon as possible. The removal versus the replacement recovery timeframes are quite different, and the removal would have allowed, and it did allow, him to return to riding in around 4 to 6 weeks once he regained strength and his normal range of motion. So essentially, this was the quickest option to return to racing for Christian at that point in time. But unfortunately for Christian, as he now has discovered, this was not a long-term solution. And in a sport that's severely physical and takes a lot of force through the arms, it didn't work out for him in the long run. So what's the difference about doing the replacement now versus when he had the removal done originally about 6 months ago? Well, he's now in a different category, medically speaking. He's in a chronic category. So from a statistical medical research point of view, it puts him at a little less favorable position statistically, with around 66% of people in this category in the research having had to change sports to continue an active lifestyle to something less physical. So it doesn't fit well for Christian at this point in time. But what about the recovery for Christian now? Obviously, he's a different kettle of fish. He's an athlete, right? This is an interesting topic. A lot of these recovery processes for moto athletes are very different. They have obviously a different pain tolerance and a different ability to recover from injury to get back. They just have a different drive. But if we talk about the surgeons as well that are involved, obviously each surgeon has their own different protocol that they like to follow post-op that they've based on their previous experiences with that particular repair job. So there's a lot of different variances that can go on here. But in general, the idea for a radial head replacement is that there is a 4 to 6 week period of no loading allowed to allow that replacement piece to unite to the radius and become solid. From that 4 to 6 week mark till about the 12-week mark, there is limitations on applying what we call a valgus and a varus force to the elbow, along with some limitations on certain positions that the elbow can do exercises in. You can turn your hand over and back, but you're best to do it at a 90-degree position, not at a straight arm, because that's putting more pressure onto that replacement point. So they're trying to avoid that for that 12-week mark. With these limitations on exercise and movement in place for around that 12-week mark, it's all designed to help protect the repair site and allow it to be a long-term solution. So when are we likely to see Christian Craig back on that Husqvarna? 12 weeks puts him at the end of May for returning to riding. Now, that's just returning to riding. That's not races, which would mean he would miss the remaining Supercross rounds in the beginning of the outdoor series as well. If things go to that approximate 12-week timeline and he can get back on the bike, you would expect that he'd need around 4 weeks minimum of riding to be race ready, making our estimate, the early estimate that he could get back to a race being Redbud in beginning of July. That's a still a fair way out, and a lot can change in that time. And this is an educated guess, right? But if anybody tells you differently, don't listen to them. They're probably making it up. Ideally, this goes well for Christian, right? This replacement has to work. He's sort of down to the last options for his elbow injury. Unfortunately, the radial head was unable to repair itself. He had to go through that removal process. That hasn't worked. He's now down to the replacement piece. Ideally, this goes well and he's able to resume his career of moto and supercross. Now, the human body is an amazing thing, and athletes in the moto world are also amazing in terms of their recovery experiences. So there is positive hope here for Christian Craig. Don't just look at all the things that we've talked about and take it as a negative. I'm just presenting the information that is pre-existing in the medical field. All right, as always, there's going to be always more to find out about these injury processes, and you'll have to check back with the AlwaysMoto podcast and YouTube channels to keep up to date. We normally go through these injury details in more depth on our podcast, so if you haven't found it, check it out on your favorite podcast player. And make sure you're subscribed and like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our updates. But that's it for this episode. Until next installment, Moto fans, be safe out there.